Sometimes power makes people think they can do anything to others. But when that power is abused, when cruelty crosses the line, the tables can turn in ways no one expects. This is the chilling story of a powerful CEO who humiliated a black janitor in front of his empire, unaware that the next day she would begin the fall of everything he ever built. The night was quiet inside Crawford Steel Global, a massive glass skyscraper in downtown Chicago, the kind of building that pierced the sky and made workers feel small the moment they stepped in. Inside, under the flickering fluorescent lights, Naomi Brooks, a 45-year-old black janitor, worked silently with her mop. She had been cleaning that building for 7 years. She was invisible to most, just the woman in overalls, pushing her cart through the halls after everyone else went home. But on this night, she wasn't invisible, not to the CEO. Charles Steele, the billionaire face of the empire, was still in his office, his tie loosened and his glass of bourbon half empty. He was known for being ruthless, sharp, and when no cameras were around, cruel. He stepped out into the hallway and saw Naomi bending down to pick up paper scraps left by careless executives. His lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Hey, janitor." His voice cut through the silence, sharp like broken glass. Naomi turned, standing straight, her hand still holding the trash bag. "Yes, sir." Charles stared at her for a long moment, sipping his drink. His eyes narrowed in disgust, as if she didn't belong in his perfect, polished tower. Then, with a cruel grin, he set his glass down on the marble counter. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to the floor. Naomi looked down. The tiles were spotless. She had just mopped them. "Sir, I already cleaned that section." "Don't talk back." His tone dropped, firm, commanding. "Get on your knees. Crawl over there, like a dog. Scrub it until I say stop." The hallway went dead silent. Naomi's throat tightened, her hands trembling as she gripped the mop handle. The humiliation weighed heavy, pressing down like stone. Charles leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "Did you hear me? On your knees." For a moment, Naomi stood frozen, her dignity battling against her fear. This was her job, her paycheck, her only way of keeping the lights on at home for her son in college. But the mocking smirk on his face told her this wasn't about cleaning. It was about breaking her. Her knees touched the cold tile. Charles let out a laugh, the kind that echoed down the hallway. "There you go. That's better. Now crawl." Naomi's hands pressed against the floor as she slowly moved forward, her back burning with shame. Each shuffle of her knees scraped against the tile, each second stretching into eternity. Charles clapped slowly, taunting. "Good girl. Maybe I should install a leash in the lobby." Something inside Naomi's chest cracked. Not her pride, but something deeper, sharper. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't even look up at him. She just crawled, her mind burning with every step, remembering every word. After what felt like forever, Charles finally waved his hand dismissively. "That's enough. Get up, and don't ever forget your place." Naomi rose slowly, dusting her palms against her pants, her face calm, but her eyes locked on him for just a moment longer than he expected. Silent, unshaken, watching. Charles smirked again, thinking he had won, thinking he had broken her. Then he turned, grabbed his bourbon and walked back to his office, shutting the door behind him. Naomi stood there in the empty hallway, her knees aching, her pride bruised but not destroyed. She took a slow breath, her heart steadying. She didn't speak. She didn't curse. She didn't cry. She simply picked up her mop, pushed her cart forward, and continued her shift. But in her silence, something had shifted. Because humiliation can turn into fuel, and sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous when pushed too far. Welcome to Black Community Stories. Make sure you like and subscribe for your top-notch stories. Naomi finished her shift that night like nothing happened, but her mind was already at war. Each step she took carried a fire that no one could see. She walked out of the skyscraper into the cold Chicago night, her breath fogging in the air, and whispered something only she could hear. He has no idea. The city lights flickered around her. Cars honked in the distance. To anyone watching, she was just another night worker heading home. But inside, Naomi Brooks had already begun counting the hours. Before we dive in deeply, let us know in the comments what country or which city you're watching this story from. We'd love to know how far this story travels. The next morning, the tower buzzed with life again. Suits hurried across the marble floors, assistants juggled coffee trays, and the air smelled of money and power. But Naomi Brooks wasn't there. For the first time in 7 years, her cart sat untouched in the basement supply closet. Her badge never swiped through the employee entrance. At first, no one noticed. After all, janitors weren't supposed to be seen. But by mid-morning, Charles Steele noticed. His office had a small coffee stain on the edge of the carpet, left from his late-night bourbon spill. He rang the front desk, demanding to know why it hadn't been cleaned. "She didn't show up today," the receptionist said carefully. Charles leaned back in his leather chair, chuckling. Guess she couldn't take a little discipline. Weak. He hung up, convinced that was the end of it. But Naomi wasn't at home, sulking. She was in a small diner on the south side, sipping black coffee while flipping through a thick folder of papers. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't waver. She read every page carefully, her mind calculating. Because Naomi Brooks wasn't just a janitor. Years ago, before life forced her into cleaning jobs, Naomi had studied business law. She never finished her degree, but she had enough knowledge to recognize something most others couldn't. And for months now, while cleaning late nights, she had noticed papers left carelessly on desks, conversations held in elevators, whispers of numbers that didn't add up. And last night's humiliation had pulled the trigger. She pulled out her old laptop, its corners chipped but still working. With a flash drive in hand, she loaded documents she had quietly copied over time. Files executives had left open on screens, reports thrown in recycling bins, memos she'd pieced together bit by bit. And what they revealed was dangerous. By noon, Naomi walked into a small legal aid office downtown. She wasn't in uniform this time. She wore jeans and a jacket, her hair tied back. The young lawyer behind the desk looked up as she entered. "Can I help you?" he asked. Naomi set the folder down with a quiet thud. "You can. But first, tell me, do you handle corporate fraud?" The lawyer raised an eyebrow, flipping the first few pages. His eyes widened, then he flipped faster, scanning line after line, his jaw tightening. "Where did you get this?" "Doesn't matter," Naomi said. Her voice was calm, but firm. "What matters is it's real, and if you want a case that'll make your name, you'll take it." The lawyer leaned back, exhaling. This is billions of dollars in hidden money, tax evasion, offshore accounts. This could bring them down. Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line. Good. Then let's get started. Meanwhile, back at the tower, Charles was entertaining board members with his usual arrogance. He cracked jokes, bragged about quarterly numbers, and dismissed anyone who dared to question him. He thought his empire was untouchable, too big to fail. But somewhere in the city, a woman he thought was beneath him was quietly unraveling every thread of his empire. That night, Charles drove home in his sleek black Mercedes, humming to himself. He had no clue that Naomi had spent the day planting seeds, calling reporters, passing anonymous tips, feeding data into hands that would know exactly how to use it. By midnight, whispers began spreading in places Charles never paid attention to. Journalists emailed each other about a leak. Lawyers whispered about evidence. Even government regulators got anonymous envelopes slipped under their doors. Charles Steele slept peacefully in his mansion that night, while Naomi Brooks sat at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen glowing in the dark. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She was planning. Because humiliation doesn't end with tears, it ends with fire. And Naomi wasn't going to let this fire die down. The following morning, the first crack appeared in Charles Steele's perfect glass empire. At 9:15 a.m., an email blasted across financial news outlets. Whistleblower evidence points to massive fraud at Crawford Steel Global. The headlines spread like wildfire. Within minutes, traders on Wall Street started whispering. Phones rang non-stop inside the skyscraper. The company's PR team scrambled into Charles's office, their faces pale, papers trembling in their hands. Charles laughed when they showed him. This? Some baseless smear. Probably a jealous competitor. Relax. But the head of PR shook her head. Sir, they quoted figures only someone inside the company would know. Offshore accounts, fake subsidiaries, it's detailed. Charles's grin faded. Impossible. Nobody knows that information. Yet, someone did. Down in a modest Chicago neighborhood, Naomi watched the news on her old television. She sat cross-legged on the couch, her son Malik beside her. He was 19, studying economics at the local college. He frowned as the anchor spoke. Mom, did you have something to do with this? Naomi didn't look at him, just sipped her coffee. Let's just say people like him don't think folks like us pay attention. Malik's eyes widened. You're the whistleblower? She turned, finally, her face calm but sharp. Don't say that word out loud. Just know, sometimes when someone treats you like less than human, you remind them what real strength looks like. Back at headquarters, the board of directors was restless. Angry phone calls poured in. Investors demanded explanations. Reporters gathered outside the building, microphones ready, cameras flashing. Charles stormed into the boardroom, his temper hot. We'll shut this down, deny everything, threaten lawsuits. No one can touch us. But as he spoke, his CFO leaned in, whispering urgently. Charles, the SEC just called. They're opening a preliminary investigation. Charles slammed his fist against the table. The sound echoed through the room. Find the leak, he barked. I want every computer checked, every employee questioned. Someone inside did this, and when I find them, they'll regret it. He didn't know the truth. The leak wasn't from some executive with inside access. It came from a janitor who had spent years in the shadows, gathering more than anyone realized. By evening, the story hit national news. Talk shows debated it. Anchors spoke with dramatic pauses, words like collapse, and criminal hung in the air. Naomi walked into a quiet church on the south side. She sat alone in the back pew, head bowed, hands folded. But she didn't pray for forgiveness or safety. She prayed for strength. Because she knew what was coming wasn't going to be quick. Charles Steele was powerful. Men like him didn't crumble easily. They fought, clawed, and dragged others down with them. But Naomi wasn't afraid anymore. As she rose from the pew, an older woman sitting near the front looked back. "Baby, you look heavy with something. You all right?" Naomi offered a small smile. "I will be." That night, Charles appeared on national television. His tone was polished, smooth, the voice of a man used to controlling a room. "These accusations are false," he said confidently, cameras flashing. "We are a clean, thriving company. Someone out there wants to destroy us, but I assure you, they will fail." He ended with a tight smile. But the moment the cameras turned off, he snapped. Papers flew across his office. He shouted at his assistant. His hands shook as he poured another drink. For the first time in years, Charles Steele felt something he wasn't used to: fear. And Naomi Brooks, the janitor he thought was powerless, sat at her kitchen table reviewing yet another set of files. She had more, much more. The storm had only begun. The skyscraper that once glowed like a symbol of strength now carried tension in every corner. Employees whispered in the hallways. Executives walked with stiff shoulders, avoiding reporters who camped outside the glass doors. The once invisible janitors, receptionists, and clerks noticed it too. Fear had settled into the building like a shadow. And Charles Steele was unraveling. By Tuesday morning, shares of Crawford Steele Global dropped 12%. The financial channels reported on it non-stop. Analysts speculated if the empire was too big to fail or ripe for collapse. And behind every headline, Naomi's carefully gathered evidence was driving the fire. Inside his corner office, Charles paced back and forth, barking orders into his phone. "Buy the stock back. Stabilize it. Call the lawyers. I want injunctions filed. And somebody find out who's feeding them this garbage." His assistant, pale and exhausted, stood near the door. "Sir, with respect, the board wants answers. They're calling an emergency meeting." Charles spun around, his eyes blazing. "Let them. They wouldn't have a company without me. I built this empire." But pride doesn't stop panic. That same afternoon, Naomi walked quietly into a newspaper building on Michigan Avenue. She met a senior investigative journalist in a dim office stacked with files and coffee cups. She handed him a second folder, thicker, heavier. He flipped through the pages, his face hardening. This isn't just fraud. This is criminal, bribery, insider trading. If half of this checks out, he won't just lose the company. He could face prison. Naomi leaned back in her chair, her voice steady. "Good. The world should know who he really is." The journalist looked up at her, studying her expression. "Most whistleblowers come here shaking. You don't even flinch." Naomi's eyes darkened. "That's because I already survived the worst part. The rest is just noise." By Wednesday morning, the fallout deepened. Government officials arrived at the headquarters with formal letters of investigation. The SEC released a statement. Cable news played loops of Charles's face, his confident denial from the earlier broadcast, now replayed with biting commentary from analysts who didn't believe him. Reporters swarmed his mansion gates. Drones hovered above his pool. Neighbors peeked through curtains. His empire, once untouchable, had become entertainment for the masses. But Charles refused to back down. That evening he called a private meeting at his mansion. The top board members arrived in black SUVs, their faces grim. Wine flowed, but the mood was sour. One director finally spoke up, his voice low. "Charles, it's bad, real bad. Regulators have subpoenaed documents. Reporters are onto things we've been covering for years. We need a plan." Charles slammed his glass onto the table, shattering it. "You all act like cowards. This is nothing. A smear. I'll bury whoever's behind it." But as his blood boiled, across town, Naomi's small kitchen glowed with a single lamp. Malik sat opposite her, watching his mother scan yet another document. "Mom, aren't you scared?" he asked quietly. Naomi didn't look up. "Of him? No. I've been scared before. When your father left, when bills piled up, when I didn't know if we'd have heat in the winter. That man isn't fear, he's noise. And noise can be silenced." Malik studied her, realizing his mother wasn't just a janitor anymore. She was something else entirely, unyielding, focused, unstoppable. Meanwhile, Charles's empire bled money. By Thursday, the stock had dropped 20%. Banks froze certain transactions. 2 major investors announced they were reviewing their stake. And still, Charles didn't see it coming. He thought the storm was about lies, about competitors, about jealous insiders. But Naomi Brooks was out there, step by step, carefully unraveling the empire he built. Every humiliating word he spat at her was coming back, not in anger, but in precision. And Naomi wasn't done yet. By Friday morning, the skyscraper didn't feel like an empire anymore. It felt like a sinking ship. The air was heavy, every conversation whispered, every door slammed with panic. News vans circled outside like vultures. Protesters held signs, shouting about greed and corruption. Employees streamed out of the building with boxes in their hands, their jobs already cut as the company scrambled to hold on to cash. Charles Steele sat in his office, tie undone, sweat dripping down his forehead. He stared at the stock ticker on the giant screen. Another plunge, another billion wiped out. The empire he bragged about was crumbling faster than he could pour another drink. The board of directors barged in, their faces pale with anger. "This is over, Charles," one of them snapped. "You lied to us," another added. "You've destroyed everything." Charles's face twisted. "No, I built this. I carried you all on my back. You think you can remove me?" The chairman, usually silent, leaned in close. His words were sharp. "You're finished. The feds are circling. The press has everything. And the worst part? Somebody out there is 5 steps ahead of you." Charles froze. For the first time, he wondered who had done this, who had known so much. That same morning, Naomi Brooks walked into a courthouse, her head held high. Dressed in a simple navy suit borrowed from her sister, she didn't look like a janitor anymore. She looked like a woman carrying the weight of justice. Beside her walked the young lawyer she had first shown the papers to. Behind them, journalists scrambled to snap photos, shouting questions. Naomi didn't answer. She didn't need to. Inside the courtroom, thick stacks of evidence were handed over to federal investigators. Offshore accounts, shell companies, bribes, fraud on a massive scale. Everything Crawford Steele had hidden, Naomi had collected piece by piece, year after year. And now it was out in the open. The news hit like a thunderclap. Federal investigation launched against Crawford Steele Global. CEO faces indictment. By evening, the company's stock collapsed beyond recovery. Banks pulled out, contracts were frozen, billions of dollars gone in a single day. Charles Steele, the man who once forced a janitor to crawl on the floor, stood in his mansion watching his empire die on live television. His phone rang non-stop. Lawyers, investors, reporters. But he didn't answer. His face was pale, his hands shaking. He finally understood what true powerlessness felt like. And Naomi? She walked quietly back to her neighborhood that night. No fanfare, no celebration. Just a quiet stroll down cracked sidewalks under flickering streetlights. Malik opened the door for her, his eyes wide with pride. "Mom, you did it." Naomi exhaled slowly, setting her bag down. "No, son, he did it to himself. I just showed the world who he really was." She sat at the kitchen table, the same place where she had planned everything, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself a small smile. Not of revenge, not of gloating, but of peace. Because the empire that had once humiliated her was gone. And the man who thought she was invisible learned the hardest truth. The people you step on when you think no one is watching are the same ones who can destroy you when you least expect it. The end. Please like and subscribe for more rich stories like this. Comment below. Also, if you really loved this video and want to support the channel directly, you can hit that super thanks button below.